When it comes to knowing how much you need to save for retirement, how much risk you need in your investments, whether or not you should have annuities in your portfolio, all these different retirement topics, how do you know? Well, today we're going to answer some of those big, key, how do you know questions with Ryan Cravitz.
This is Candid Conversations, retirement talk with Ryan Cravitz of Cravitz Financial and Insurance Solutions.
Well, hello, welcome into Candid Conversations, retirement talk with Ryan Cravitz. I am Ben George. Of course, he is Ryan Cravitz at Cravitz Financial. And Ryan, I know you get a lot of questions all the time. I mean, that's part of your job, right? People come in, ask questions. I think what we're touching on today are some of the most basic questions in retirement planning, but ones that are tough to answer when you're doing it on your own.
Yeah, I figured, today it's nothing in real specific. We're not going to take a deep dive into anywhere particular, but these are definitely some good general rules of thumb just to kind of be aware of.
Yeah, I think we're going to kind of go all across the spectrum of retirement planning today. So it should be a really beneficial episode, kind of some high level information. But if you want to learn more, obviously, the best way to get in touch is kravitzfinancial.com. You can also call 714-462-9155. Everything will be down in the show description as well. So Ryan, let's jump into it. I want to start off with the simple question of how do you know how much you're going to need when you retire? How do we figure that out? Because that's the all-important question I'm sure you get asked all the time.
Yeah, and I like how you call that the simple question, right?
Straightforward, maybe, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in the end, I think that's the big question that most people want to know, right? How much do I need to have in order to retire? So, the big thing is here that I say all the time, because I get asked this all the time. How much do I need to have saved? And before I can actually pull the trigger, before I can actually retire, and the very first thing I'm going to say is, how much are you spending? What are your expenses? Because it's all dependent upon that. If you tell me that you want to be able to spend $5,000 a month, or if you want to spend $15,000 a month, well, then of course the amount that you're going to have saved in order to make all that work is going to be very, very different. So it's all dependent upon the lifestyle that you want to be able to have. And I always recommend that when you're gearing up for retirement and you're planning for that and trying to see if how much money are you actually going to need, and I like to account for that on a monthly basis, that you put together a budget, which I know is painful. Most of us do not like doing that. It's like getting a root canal at the dentist. I get it. But, breaking out your expenses between your needs and wants. How much does it cost for your mortgage or your rent if you still have your mortgage, if the house isn't paid off? And then what are utilities and food and things like that? And then in the wants budget, vacations or visiting those grandkids a couple times a year across country, perhaps, or whatever it is that's important to you, but understanding, the needs versus the wants. Create that. And then once that's created, then we can figure out, okay, this is how much we need to spend or want to spend. And then from there, one of the general guidelines I like to use here, because certainly we could take a deep dive just on this, but when we're trying to figure out, we've accumulated a certain size portfolio, how much can we actually spend from that? So my general guideline, and this is going to vary, and it depends, of course, in part on your health, your longevity, how long you're expected that you may live when you retire. Because if you retire at 60, versus 70 or 80, right, your life expectancy won't be as long. And then you could perhaps spend a higher percentage of your portfolio. But let's say you're going to live for 30 years. And if we knew that, then kind of as a starting point, I like to use is about 5% withdrawal rate on a portfolio, adjusted for inflation. Now, beyond what we want to get into here, most people I find don't continue to want to spend in a linear fashion all throughout retirement. Most people want to scale back spending. And in fact, Ben, most of the time, I'm trying to get my clients to spend more money, because the people that have been the best savers over the years, also I find are the people that have the hardest time really becoming a spender and really enjoying themselves. So that's the other side of the challenge for sure.
Yeah, it's a difficult transition. You got to change your whole mindset with a lot of that stuff. So trying to figure out what you're going to need all begins with those needs and wants. So again, you got to work through some of those first. And takes us to our next how do you know? And this is probably one that I guess a lot of people are curious about. Like, how much do I need to have in savings? I know a lot of people kind of want to know benchmarks and if they're on the right track, but is that answer necessarily the same as that first question, right? How much you're going to need in retirement? I'm assuming you want to have a little bit more in savings than what you're going to need, right?
Yeah, in the way that I would answer this or suggest you think about it is it depends upon if you're already retired or if you're still working. Because, if you're still working, you're still building up assets and things like that. And if your income is dependent upon your job because you're not retired and you're not living off your assets at this point. If you're still working, then it's important to make sure that you have some money available in cash, an emergency reserve, if you will. And so generally, I recommend somewhere between 3 and 6 months, but that can vary tremendously. It depends if you're married, are both of you working? Is just one spouse working? Are your jobs, more stable? Maybe both of you are in government jobs, for instance, or it's just one of you working, but one of you is working in an industry where the job stability just isn't that strong. Well, that would be a reason to want to have a longer or more cash available in an emergency reserve, more months of money available to you. Now, in retirement, it's all different, right? Because now we're not dependent upon our income from our job. Now we're creating an income plan from our savings, our investments, Social Security, pension, right? Whatever we have available to us. And then sometimes it can look strange because, with some people, depending on the type of plan that we develop, we might have a year or two of money in more or less more emergency reserve type money, which is, maybe short-term treasuries or other savings and things like that. And the reason that we'll do that is to help mitigate sequence of returns risk, which is that risk that when markets go down, your portfolio goes down, you need to withdraw from it. And instead of maybe withdrawing from that, maybe you're going to withdraw from your savings or something like that. So there's different strategies around that. So, the answer really is dependent if you're still working, not working, and if you are retired, what your retirement income plan is.
Yeah, there's always a lot of different factors that go into getting an answer. So you can't really get a true answer from this video necessarily. You can get a little bit of guidance. You always want to reach out to Ryan to really dial into your situation, what your goals are in retirement. All right, now a lot of people want to know about investing, right? This is, I'm sure, a big part of planning for retirement for a lot of people. And when you talk investing, you have to talk risk. So how do you know how much risk you should be taking with your investments?
Yeah, and this is an interesting one too here, Ben, because so often when we think of risk, most often people are thinking of market risk. What happens if all of a sudden my investments drop, 20, 30, 40, 50% or something like that because the market takes a big hit. A lot of times that's what we're thinking about. It's just market risk. But there's other risks involved as well here, such as inflation risk, as an example. And so we have to balance all these different risks here in retirement. But, just to keep it simple, if we're talking about just market risk and we're creating an investment plan for ourselves, the first thing that I always recommend that we do is we have to think with the end in mind. So we got to think through, kind of like we were talking before, what are our expenses? How much do we need to meet those expenses? And then how do we create an income plan and an investment plan around that in order to meet those objectives? And then I often say, if we won the game, we can stop playing. So in other words, what I mean by that is if we don't need to take more risk in order to meet the income goals with our investment portfolio, then let's not do it. We don't have to do it. There's no reason to at that point. But I always say too that it's an art and a science because we got to marry the objective with the subjective. Because even though objectively we might look at the math, we might look at the numbers, we might put together the planning on the financial plan and the software and run the analysis, and it might say, hey, objectively we have the risk capacity and we could take this much risk. This does make sense. But if you don't have the risk tolerance, the comfort level with the level of the volatility that that plan is showing, then that's not going to be comfortable for you. If you turn on the news and you see the Dow Jones lost 800 points, and even if your portfolio went down, but maybe it went down within an expected range that you would expect with that certain portfolio based on certain metrics like standard deviation, which is a level of or a measure of risk and volatility that you would have within a portfolio. Even if it's within those expected ranges, if it's not comfortable for you, then that's not going to work. So we always have to marry the objective with the subjective to make sure that it makes sense and that it works for you, so that you're comfortable. And if it meets your income needs, that's what's going to be most important there. Now, the other side of that too, Ben, I was just working with a guy last week who has saved a considerable amount of money for retirement, more than he's going to need. And in his case, it was a situation where we could invest even more aggressively in that case, because the money wasn't just going to be for him; it was also going to be for his kids that he wanted to invest that money for. So, the answer is all going to be dependent upon somebody's situation.
Yeah, absolutely. But I appreciate you taking us through that, get us a better understanding of kind of how you come up to that number, because it's not always about what you need for growth, but it's about what you're comfortable with too. So that's so important. All right, when you're talking about building an investment portfolio and into retirement, I know people oftentimes are trying to figure out ways of bringing income because they're worried about not having a paycheck. They want to make sure that consistent income. So another question comes up, how do you know if you should be buying an annuity for your retirement income?
Well, so probably a good example is like the guy I was working with last week. That would be a good example where he would probably not want to get an annuity, because in that case, we were going to be very aggressive with his money. His withdrawal rate was really low. So, the risk of sequence of returns risk was going to be, not much of a concern. It's still there. Don't get me wrong. We still need to be aware of that, but we weren't going to have to withdraw high levels of money from the portfolio. So that was going to allow us to be more aggressive. Now, on the other hand, if we're in a situation where, maybe we're really valuing that stability, maybe having our income protected, maybe we do need to include some guaranteed, or want to include some guaranteed income into the mix beyond what Social Security might provide or what a pension might provide. That's when an annuity could perhaps make sense, as an example. There's several different situations where it could, but just to give you a real quick example, let's say you want to spend $8,000 a month in retirement, and your Social Security benefits are going to be $4,000 a month. Well, now you got a $4,000 a month income gap. So, sometimes what people like to do is take a portion of their investment portfolio and position that with an insurance company into an annuity that will provide that $4,000 a month in income. And then in the investment portfolio, maybe now go more aggressive, maybe more stock focused in that portfolio, because it's not going to be need for the regular expenses. So that's just kind of one area where it might make sense.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense to try to structure that in a way to give yourself some flexibility, some of that extra money. So I know it's not a tool for everyone, and it's not a decision that everyone goes with, the annuity, but one that could work into your plan. But again, you want to have a strategy for how you're going to utilize it. All right, Ryan, going through a couple more questions here. The how do you knows of retirement planning, some broader topics, but I know ones that are so key to retirement planning. And the next one is tax efficiency. It's so important to make sure you're keeping as much of that money as possible in retirement. So how do you know if your retirement plan is tax efficient?
So there's so much here. So let's just kind of talk about a few things maybe that are going to be kind of most important. Okay. The first kind of general guideline is just be cognizant of what types of investments you're holding and which types of accounts. Certain types of investments, for instance, are going to trigger more capital gains. And then as a result, you would probably want to have those in a tax deferred account, like an IRA as an example, whereas other types of investments, they may not trigger much, capital gains or pay dividends in the same way. So that might be, the type of investment to have in that taxable account. Another thing to kind of think through, and a lot of times this comes up. Should I contribute to the pre-tax or the Roth 401k. My employer now offers both. What should I do here? And so there's no right answer for all, but kind of a general guideline that I like to at least think about is that if you're in, let's say, the 10 or the 12% tax bracket, that's when I would definitely lean towards contributing to a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA in that case. Because remember, with that, you're investing after tax. Your money is now growing tax deferred, and then in the future, assuming it's a qualified distribution, you're withdrawing that tax free. And so if you're only having to pay 10 or 12% tax, maybe you're a younger person, you're in your early years of making money, that could be a great opportunity to do that. Now, the other extreme is if you're in, let's say, a 32% tax bracket or higher, you're in a higher tax bracket, maybe closer to retirement, maybe you don't have as much saved in your pre-tax retirement accounts. Well, this could be more of a reason to save in a pre-tax account there at that stage. But if you're like in 22, 24, that's kind of when you're more in the gray area. Again, these are just general guidelines, but these are kind of some things to think about. And the other part here too is making sure that you're diversified from the standpoint of how much money that you have in different types of accounts. And so you're thinking through that, like if you're not retired, but you're planning for, you're approaching retirement, and you're thinking through, okay, when I get to retirement, where am I going to get my income from? So it's important to, think about these things ahead of time. I always say, again, like I mentioned earlier, think about it with the end in mind when making the decisions as far as where you're going to put money and when. All these things in retirement are going to affect, perhaps they call it the Social Security tax torpedo, and that's where certain money can cause Social Security to become taxable or may not have been otherwise. But if you withdrew it from, let's say, a tax-free account, it may have not affected that. Right. So all depending on where you are within the tax brackets and with Medicare and the IRMA surcharges. Right. So, having some flexibility with different types of accounts that are taxed differently can help put your plan potentially in a better situation.
Yeah, so much of it is not just, hey, what are you doing today? But there are decisions that you make into retirement that are going to have a big impact on your taxes as well as you're withdrawing that money and distributing it. So again, make sure you're working with a professional to maximize that money that you're able to keep. That's the name of the game. And again, kravitzfinancial.com. Start there. Ron, be happy to sit down with you, start talking about your overall picture and some strategies that might work for you. All right, one last one, Ryan. We talked quickly about the Social Security tax torpedo. Let's spend just a little bit more time on Social Security because, again, another big piece of retirement income for most people. So how do you know when you should start it?
Well, so again, another big question, but maybe some good rules of thumb to consider are one thing that I see that people forget about is with widow benefits is know if you may be entitled to a widow benefit. And if you are, you may be able to start that benefit as early as age 60, even as early as age 50 if you're disabled. But it's 60, it's not 62. And the other thing is that you could start with a widow benefit and then switch over to your own benefit, perhaps in the future, allow your own benefit to grow and earn those delayed retirement credits. And sometimes that could be a real winner for some people that are in that situation. Another one is to consider is the earnings test when you're thinking about when you're going to take your retirement benefit, because you can take your benefits between 62 and 70, but if you take it before your full retirement age, then if you're working and you make too much money, then all or some of your benefits will get withheld. Now, they won't be completely lost. What happens is at your full retirement age, they will then account for that and they'll adjust your benefit with a positive adjustment going forward. But it is something that you'll want to consider. And probably a couple other things to consider is if you're married or if you're divorced. So if you're divorced, think about if you're entitled to a benefit there, might be higher than your own. If you're married, how to best coordinate your benefit with your spouse. And one real key thing to think about is that when one spouse passes away, you're going to lose a Social Security check. You keep the higher of the two, but you're going to lose that smaller one. So sometimes it can make sense to delay taking that higher benefit if you're married. when figuring out the best plan as a couple. So so many things to consider, Ben, not just with Social Security, but really with all of these. So hopefully this gives at least a kind of a highlight of some of the key things to be thinking about.
Yeah, I know we covered a lot, a wide range of topics as it relates to retirement planning. And I know, Ryan, I guess if anyone has any questions, any one of these questions kind of trips you up or makes you think a little bit more, that's a great reason to have a conversation with someone like yourself, right? And kind of begin that process, any one of these areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you need to know how all this works if you're going to create a good retirement income plan for yourself. I always say you only get one chance to do this right. Right. And for many people today, you're going to be retired for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years or more. And so feeling confident in that retirement plan is so important. Really, that's the key that gives people to that confidence to spend and really enjoy themselves. So, yeah, I mean, it's important to make sure you understand how all this works.
Again, all the contact information is down in the description, but just remember kravitzfinancial.com. A lot of good tools there, plus more video content, podcasts, and much, much more. Ryan, thanks for taking us through this. I know pretty broad topic today, but I think we covered some really important areas within planning, and I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Ben.
Thanks for checking out today's episode. Please remember to like the video on YouTube and subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you're within 5 years of your desired retirement date, let's make sure you're on the right track with a free 20-minute consultation. Ryan can help answer your pressing questions, such as, when can I retire? What are my options for healthcare in retirement? Should I adjust my investment strategy as I get older? And when should I collect Social Security? This consultation is the perfect starting point to craft a sound retirement plan. Schedule your call now by clicking the link in the description or visiting kravitzfinancial.com.